right, so up next we have Ben McDougal, and he is with Techstars Iowa, also 1 Million Cups Midwest, right? But he did actually help start he was the one that started the 1 Million Cups Des Moines chapter. How many years ago was that?
My friends, this month is the 10th anniversary of 1 Million Cups out of Kansas City. We were the first remote location in November. So we're coming up on 10 years of having coffee together every Wednesday morning. It's pretty sweet.
Yeah. And who here maybe does not know what 1 Million Cups is? Is there anyone? Okay, so we do have a couple people. What's your pitch?
All right, this is your weekly dose of innovative energy. It's a chance to be around entrepreneurs over coffee every Wednesday morning in about 135 places around the country. And after folks gather, an entrepreneur shares what they're building in 6 to 10 minutes, followed by the interactive Q&A that fuels education through the art of connection.
Well said. Woo! And we do have an organizer in the room as well. Organizer? Say hello, Annie.
We got Eric from 1MCCR too. So.
Yeah, and I was part of 1 Million Cup Savings actually, so fun fact. And I know recently the Global Insurance Accelerator, I think there was a couple of the cohort members that actually pitched yesterday, right? So, so it's a great area, and as we're actually related to pitching, so Ben's going to talk through how to make a concise, compelling, and clean presentation as you guys are, whether it's pitching to venture capital or if it's pitching at 1 Million Cups, or through competitions as well. There's many areas that would actually require a pitch, or what is called a pitch deck. And Ben's going to walk you through that. And then later on, we have John in the room with us. He's with Open Loop, and he's going to actually walk you through his last presentation. They just raised $8 million. So with that, I'll let you kick off.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Good to be here, my friends. I have sat in your seats many of times. This Raising Capital seminar is valuable. And as I heard, riveting was a word, so that's fantastic. Hopefully you're being able to translate this into your own situation. As Diana said, my name is Ben McDougal. I'm an entrepreneurial ecosystem builder, an author, someone who, like you, is a fellow founder, and really have found my passion to be the art of connection. And so I thought I'd start with a short introduction of how I spend my time. This is a diversified career portfolio. And so without diluting myself to mediocrity, I've found ways of plugging into different activities in a way that allows me to lean into my passions through some of the things you see on the right, which are my own ventures, as well as the unmatched energy of accelerating others through that community building side of the work. And so Techstars is one of the reasons why I'm here today, knowing that there's a lot of pitch practice, and it's a program, it's an accelerator that's geared for raising capital. And so it's been a pleasure to be a part of Techstars Iowa on the ecosystem development side, but Curdy Levy and I partner up, and as you might imagine, we're involved with all the things. And so that's been a pleasure being along Techstars. In the same orbit, but on the nonprofit side of things, is the Kauffman Foundation. And so that's where 1 Million Cups spawned out of. They work with policy, education, and then 1 Million Cups was like this experiment that escaped the lab 10 years ago. And so it's been a treat connecting with all of Des Moines, of course, but then 135 others around the country. Like if you travel, you got friends having coffee on Wednesday. And so I'm happy to talk more about what 1 Million Cups is about here in Iowa. There's 5 different communities, but also I know we have the GIA in the house and people from around the country, and so that is a program that transcends borders. Over on the right, this is craft beer up on top. We built an electronic beer flight paddle, and now it's a beer festival app as well, so the customer discovery has been a pretty good time. Open is an open house scheduler that connects home builders to real estate agents through that recurring activity of scheduling those open houses. Wrote my first book last year, which is something I'm really proud of, but also something I thought I would share a quick intro for, knowing that I've got one here to give away. Ben Ovader on Twitter would be the way to connect probably most quickly, and I'll look at some of those follows and we'll give one away after our session here today. And so this has been a treat. This is everything I know about entrepreneurship in the connected era. Some of this content that we'll be talking about today is within that narrative that, of course, is more than just your slide deck design, but it's all the things from ideation all the way to that wild card of persistence. So I thought I'd introduce this fun 1-year anniversary. You don't need this book. I was telling Eric, I just minted my first NFT collection, so now I'm basically a big deal because we got an NFT available. Just kidding. All right, so let's dive in. The fact is, any Seth Godin fans here? Nice. All right, so he talks about, like, instead of advertising, like, just be remarkable, right? Lean into the tribe you trust. Be thankful, be generous, and that leads to fresh opportunities within your community, around your team, and within your different entrepreneurial ecosystems. And so when I think about, all right, the pitch, right? I think about the opportunity you have to translate your story in a compelling way. And so it seems obvious, but showing up is sometimes skipped. It takes like a little extra energy to go to that event when you don't feel like it. But every time that seems to be the case, the universe always pays you back if you do say yes, right? I found yes leads to more adventure. And so being able to commit, showing up, being consistent, and doing that in an ongoing way is kind of the first step. Thinking about your numbers, we've talked a lot about that today. Know those numbers, right? So no matter what environment you are in, you're able to translate that to the audience, whether that's in an elevator moment, a 1 minute, or a book, right? These is an entire spectrum of ways that you'd be able to translate your story, having that data-driven insight to showcase the true levels of understanding. And that translates, of course, to your business as well. We all have a fun story. The why and how that's translated is a good way to just have that being able to share it in different ways. The slide deck design that we'll look at here shortly is a way that you can personalize your company. And so have that be consistent, knowing that you're tracking those key performance indicators. A good question in that 1 million cups environment that you might receive is like, what's a metric that you're tracking right now? Right? So have these KPIs in place so that you can like identify progress, both in the short term and the long term. Confidence, I think, comes from understanding. And so the more depth you have in understanding, the more confident you'll naturally be. Speak clearly, being humble and curious, like almost inviting doubt so that you can be wrong and therefore become more right. What a beautiful thing. I think of Think Again by Adam Grant is a fun book that has continued to teach us ways of, instead of always simplifying things, which can actually polarize a conversation, adding complexity to create a spectrum where we can align. And so that's something I wanted to include here. Making sure that you offer appealing action items and follow up. Kind of like the show up part at the beginning. Like the moment is important, but that transcends into that follow-up email, that next caffeinated conversation. And so being consistent in that way is going to lead to kind of that two-way street of trust. When I think about presenting at 1 million cups, it's a safe space. It's meant to share. So I'd like to create some uniqueness between presentation and pitching. Pitching is meant to impress. That's what we're all doing when we're sharing our presentations to investors. Like that's a moment where you're really pitching. On the other side of that interaction is that chance to enjoy a safe space, be transparently vulnerable, talk about areas that of course you're excited about, but also areas that you could truly need some help with. And what you'll feel is like a community hug if there's a Q&A. So the things in gray here are the similarities between these two different types of experiences. And then the darker gray there is kind of the differences, right? So knowing that the simplicity can probably lead to more concise impact during a pitch, where in a presentation you may have a little bit more room to flesh out an idea, to create a more interactive experience. Knowing who's presented in the past, looking at videos, knowing what you're getting into is always a good idea. We talked with 1 Million Cups organizers about the easiest way to coach a presenter is to have them attend before they present. So I know we had some presentations yesterday. I hope those went well. And so being able to know what you're walking into, but also thinking about how that relates to after that time. Knowing that, yes, this moment is going to matter, but are we connected on social media? Can I throw an email out? Maybe I go back on the next Wednesday to continue the conversations. Even though I might not be on stage, the conversations can still be valuable. And that following up by transcending those moments is the thought here between both. Speaking of knowing your audience, talk a little about the layers of understanding. So it's easy, when you hear a lot of pitches, it's easy to go deep fast when you know what you're talking about. But think about the last time someone told you like the in-depth story of their company and they just kind of went too far down those rabbit holes. The details kind of become numbing. And they are at this like understanding level, this thought leadership layer, right? They've been in it all day, every day. This is their life. If you're pitching someone for the first time, or maybe presenting to the larger audience, like your goal is to spark curiosity, and through that conciseness, like moving them down this layered chart towards that interest. There'll be fear. Right? They'll have some of those objections that will come to mind. Your goal is to push them past that layer of objection into that engagement side. So, while maybe you can land a deal in that first 1 minute interaction, the likelihood of it probably taking a little bit longer and playing that long game allows you to, instead of overloading someone on the front end, creating some intrigue that guides them to a deeper level of interest as you kind of hold their hand strategically toward your levels of understanding. And I think that's a helpful kind of framework to think about as I hear so many pitches that have so many details, and it's just, you could probably cut it in a fourth, and it would have actually a better impact. So thinking about maybe the less is more in those early places, giving yourself some meat on the bone as you translate that interaction long term. All right, shifting gears a little bit, talking about slide deck design. And so what I've kind of leaned into so far feels a little bit more theoretical and conversational. This is a little bit more tactical when you think about that program you use. I didn't include all the programs you can use, but PowerPoint is not the only option. There's a lot of Google Slides. That's great for collaboration. It's the safest, I will say, if you have like a full GIA group and they're all on one slide deck, making sure that it's easiest to work in a lot of different slides, but in one place. I like Keynote. That's what this is built in. Gives you a lot of neat animations that aren't jarring, but still create some interesting visuals. And every slide matters. So I'm going to go down each one real quick, consistent and concise. I think not having a bunch of slides, but instead thinking of these as support mechanisms. Look, if you have a paragraph on your slide, you're giving the audience two choices: read or pay attention to what you're talking about. So if you have too much content on your slides, you're literally offering the opportunity for someone to get distracted, and then guess what happens? Right? So you can lose people so quickly in any environment, and I think punctuation, paragraphs, if it's something they're going to read, I think that's a lot different, right? We're talking about more of a verbal presentation or a pitch when I think about slide design here. We'll look at John's slides here shortly, and that's a little bit of a shifted type of approach. So we'll talk about the differences so that there's clarity around that. Thinking about the visuals, I mean, when you see a great presentation, it might have a word on each slide. Like, this is a little thick. But thinking about visuals that support your conversation versus trying to replicate something so you can stand there and kind of read it to the group. The animation thing is, of course, kind of like, do you like red or blue? It's a choice that is up to you. I think it's important to have a single click between transitions so that you're not like, oh, okay, here we go. And now you're behind and now it's mixed up. And so thinking about the single click transition as a very easy way so that you don't get lost. And that way you're not always like this in order to make sure you're on point. You don't want to be thinking about the clicker or the slide deck when you're talking to investors, talking within a community. And so having that as a good way of course, adding some subtle animations, but automating them so it remains that simple navigation with this tool in your hand. Finishing with purpose. I'll share a couple of most common mistakes, and one of them is you come into it, you've got the first introductory moments really planned, you're on point, the overview is solid, and then you're like blabbing on, or you just fall off, or you get cut off. Like the closing remarks should have just as much strategy and just as much attention as the opening. And so thinking about how your slides land, and knowing that that final slide, for instance, is going to be up behind you for a photo at your 1 Million Cups presentation. Thinking about that aspect of media, and once again, transcending the moment through different tactics. The backslide. If you have a Q&A, you can avoid some of the numbness that occurs when you start loading in too much detail. You can have some of that pricing, or maybe that competitive landscape, or some of your specific things. You can almost like guess what questions will be asked and have that slide deck to support a more in-depth conversation for something that doesn't necessarily is important, but might actually detract the flow of a more concise initial presentation. Having some backups, having a couple of adapters so you show up, having a clicker with you in case you need it. Some of these tactical things can feel trivial, but coming in prepared will give you that confidence so that you're not like worried too much about what's going on here, and instead can, once again, deliver the message. And then I like the branding aspect of connecting it to that investor pack. So we've talked a lot about the documents that you're crafting, some of the marketing materials that may supplement that. Maybe it's the slide deck, the one-pager. These types of things should have a flow together. It makes it harder to keep it updated, but it's another level when you present something that's really sharp, easy to navigate, not all fluff, right? But still has like a flow to it that makes sense. So when I think about the content flow of a pitch, I think it's pretty easy to create these blocks of storytelling. Everyone tells their story differently. Your personality of the company is always going to be unique. But some of this framework stuff can give you, I think, some peace, knowing that it doesn't have to be this super complicated or complex interaction. Leaning into that intro, right? We'll talk about each one of these sections here briefly before we work into some of the common mistakes. But this was a fun visual that I thought would lead us to the next 3 slides. So the intro, right? Making that positive impact, bringing some energy. If you're wanting someone's attention, you've got to love it too. And so coming into each of those discussions as if it was the first, and being able to translate some of that passion, some of that persistence, some of that consistency into those opening remarks. On each one of these 3 slides, I've highlighted a framework from my friend Saba Karim. He is the deal flow guy with a team at Techstars, and here's like 100 pitches a day. And so what he did was he translated the 42-second pitch. And so, of course, this is very concise, and you probably have more time, but you can actually translate your story in less than a minute very clearly. And so on each slide, I'll throw out a couple of examples so that you can kind of use your own story and drop that in to this. So setting the scene, preparing someone for what they're going to experience without it feeling like this big agenda or here's this like task list that we have to work through together. Being able to capture that attention, as I said, and then, of course, visualizing that story so that there's some early awareness, and then we can start moving folks into that curiosity and down that path of understanding. As you move through those first few moments, don't get too windy, right? You can be concise and get to the point. A lot of times you are trying to just say words to give it some a sense of thickness, but what you're doing is you're kind of detracting away from the points, the impact moments you're trying to make. And so lean into the pain as you transition from that intro. I think a lot of us, especially some of our tech founders, people who are building technology, want to lean into the features. Our program does this, and it has this feature, and it has that feature, and it has this feature, and it does this. It doesn't do that yet, but we're going there. That stuff matters internally, but when you're telling your story, it's more important to lean into the pain. And so when you're building your company, this is a quick segue, but instead of a vitamin that someone might want to take, think about a painkiller that they have to have. And this will give the company a lot more opportunities to find that product market fit. When you are building something that is just a no-brainer versus something that you just have to continuously educate or figure out how this might fit into someone's situation. It's a process of product market fit and is connected to founder market fit as well. And so as you're working through your interview, or your overview, thinking about that target audience, speaking to how you're delivering that pain-killing solution to a problem that they, of course, have experienced before, and then translating that to your solution and making sure that there's clarity on the value proposition that you're suggesting. Following it up with, if there's time, the competitive landscape and why it's important, and knowing the timeline in which it matters to move, whether it's an investment, whether it's kind of building awareness in a community, or maybe it's more of a sales environment, talking with customers. So as you might imagine, the overview part is kind of the guts to your pitch. And so recognizing that every word matters, whether it's a minute or whether it's 10, leaning into that will give you the clarity that can translate stories into those different layers toward engagement and then understanding. Traction, right? That's something, especially in the Midwest, people are going to want to hear. One of the interesting things I think about is the elephant in the room. Just throw that out into the room early. Instead of having that linger as a question that can lead to maybe some hesitations from an audience, tackling it head on is an easy way to just kind of eliminate that from people's mind. And so when I think about traction throughout a couple of different kind of layers of traction, it's going to depend on the stage at which you're at for your company. Everyone likes revenue, and so of course that is something that you can highlight if you have it. If you don't, you start moving yourself down this path, and maybe you're still in very early customer discovery stages, right? You're doing surveys, you can show the diversity of people you're talking to, the quantity of folks you're interacting with. This shows that you've committed to finding a solution that truly solves a problem. Once again, finishing with some action items and knowing the simplicity that can be if necessary. I didn't mention the backslide piece, but I think that's a fairly obvious aspect of any slide deck design. Those can be very strategic and very powerful. I think of a presentation I made at 1 Million Cups, Kansas City one time, and it's 6 minutes. So it's concise, but there's still enough room for some fun. So I'm up there at the Kauffman Foundation, sharing what we've been building with the Flight Bright venture. And the first question was my first backslide. The second question was my second backslide. I mean, it looked as though I knew what question. I even said, I didn't know those were coming. They looked seeded. And so knowing your environment, going back to that and having those backslides when it makes sense is something to keep in mind as you close out that storytelling path. These are some common mistakes we've already kind of talked about just in passing. Thinking about kind of the protracted storytelling that leads to the ultimate numbing of details. I think, of course, details matter. We'll look at John's slide deck here shortly. Details matter if it's a pitch deck and someone's really making a decision based off the in-depth information of what you're building when it comes to raising capital. But in that public setting, in those more momentary interactions, that can be a pretty quick way of losing some attention. Thinking about the slide deck, the jargon, right? Jargon is helpful to speed up efficiency of conversation between humans who understand what that means. But it often, especially in Zoom land, feels as though it's like this way of like protecting your knowledge or your perceived level of understanding. If you understand something like your business, you can describe it 10 different ways. Right? Instead of just using the jargon that might catch someone's attention, but then the next time you use it, it becomes this facade. Thinking about those layers of understanding and being able to describe something in a word all the way over to a white paper. That's what I'm talking about when I think of like overuse of jargon. Knowing that you can stand up here and look at note cards, and that might give you a sense of peace, but I promise you don't need them. If you memorize your pitch, I think that's okay. It can lead to some confidence, but it might also lead to rigidity. If something happens and I've memorized it, or I get on the wrong slide and now my memory, like it just, I think it's better to know the thesis of what you're talking about, the flow at which it lands within that story, and allowing yourself to do it a bunch of different ways, and over time, it doesn't need to be memorized. You'll be able to translate the ideas with different types of vocabulary, and it will resonate better because it's connected to the actual moment. And so that's what I mean when I think about memorized equals rigidity. And then lastly, like the unplanned closing. You have a minute and 59 seconds comes and you're still in the overview. We've all been there, we've all heard these. It's jarring, it's unfortunate. You know, the moderator always feels bad for cutting you off, but not having that happen so you can lean into that finishing moment leaves them with something to get excited about. So I know today can feel thick, it can feel daunting. Entrepreneurship is complex. It's not an A to B path. Everyone's got a unique situation, and one size does not fit all. But I thought I would leave you with just a little of my heart. I'm thankful for entrepreneurship. It is a path that has guided me to career nirvana, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity to be here with you today, but to also share a little encouragement on all the things that you are blessed to be building. And I find that to be very peaceful and satisfying when you are able to spend your time in that way. So if you'd like to connect, I'm here for you always. Curdy and I, with Techstars, as well as with the Kauffman Foundation and 1 Million Cups. This is a fun QR code. I'm curious, maybe in the back, does this work? Open your camera. We have such nice AV here. No, I want you to see if you can reach. I want to see how far it can reach. This is like,
Yep.
Did it work?
Yep.
Nice. All right, that's fun. So that's an opportunity for us to connect throughout the social media landscape. And I'll take a peek at Twitter here after John and I have a chance to chat and give one of these books away to the group. So thank you for the time. I appreciate an opportunity to talk with so many intelligent and passionate entrepreneurs, community builders, intrapreneurs, students, and everything in between. So now, well, one thing you should probably do is leave a moment for laughter or for applause. So thank you again. All right. Oh man, I have too much fun doing this. All right, so now we have an opportunity to bring my friend John up here to share some stories. John is from OpenLoop. This was one of our 10 companies in the 2020 class of Techstars Iowa. I'm going to let John share a little bit about himself, the current state of the company. We have his slide deck for you to take a peek at. So what a treat to kind of walk through it from a fellow founder's perspective, and then leave some time for Q&A. That can be Q&A about what I just shared, or Q&A for John and what we're going to look at here shortly. So I'm going to shift gears to that after you share a few words. John, thanks for joining me.
Pleasure to meet you all. My name is John Lensing. I'm one of the founders and CEO of OpenLoop. Quick, just high level of what we do. We are like a telehealth company, except we power other telehealth companies. We provide what we call the entire digital health infrastructure layer. So a lot of services wrapped up in that, but simplifying it down, we have a network of clinicians that utilize our tech stack, our legal stack, our compliance stack, and we partner with various telehealth companies and we see their patients for them all underneath their brand name. To date, OpenLoop has raised about $11.5 million. We are back out in the market and we're trying to close a $20 to $30 million round, probably the next 3 to 4 months. But take everything I say with a grain of salt. Everybody's fundraising journey is their own personal one. Each personality reflects the company's personality, and so what may have worked well for us at OpenLoop might be completely different for all of you guys.
Thanks, John, for the short introduction. Before we dive into his example slide deck and talk a little bit more about his experiences, it felt like it'd be waiting too long to have Q&A after that. Any thoughts, questions from the group? It'd be a mistake not to make this feel interactive.
I was just going to ask John, the deck you're going to go through, is that your fundraising deck for the most recent round?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. That's the one that we just used.
And what got you into this model in the first place? What was the background that led to OpenLoop?
Yeah, so maybe I'll jump right into my intro that I usually give to these VCs. Typically when you get on a meeting with one of these venture capital groups, if that's what you're raising from the angel groups, they'll usually start with their own personal background, their own introduction, and say, hey, I'm a senior associate or partner at this firm. We're deploying out of our second fund. We're a venture capital group focused on health tech, insurtech. This is our sweet spot. Here's our average check size. They'll give the fund overview essentially. And then I usually jump straight into what my background is. And the way I like to structure my intro is I like to pull in my experience, kind of why I have more founder market fit, as well as right away hit them with the pain point of what we set up to fix. So my background is usually something pretty quick like, hey, I'm John Lensing. I am rural Iowan. Grew up in a small rural farm town. My father was an OBGYN. Went off to a small school in Michigan for undergrad. Started my first company up there. Exited once I graduated. Came back to Iowa then for medical school. Ended up graduating medical school, master's in plastic surgery for residency, but I started OpenLoop as a passion project that I was going to run as a side hobby. Ultimately saw enough growth and traction with OpenLoop where I decided I could have a larger impact on the healthcare ecosystem by jumping into that full time. And then I usually roll to my problem slide right away, and that's where I started addressing more of my background experience and how it relates to what we're solving.
I have a quick question on that founder market fit. What we're talking about is like an understanding of the environment that you're trying to impact. And so while I think there's a ton of value in understanding that, sometimes it can lead to like kind of not being able to see the forest, right? You're so obsessed with like your own situation. What are some ways that you counter maybe the downside of being so close to an industry?
So I think you bring up a good point, and you address in your presentation with humility and confidence. There's a very close balance. Like, to have a successful pitch, you have to come across as semi-arrogant, yet at the same time when they ask you questions, you have to be really humble about it. Because these are investors who spend a lot of time within your industry, except they're seeing it from a different perspective. So at the end of this pitch, they have to have true confidence in you as a founder, that you know every driver, every lever, every in and out of your business, but you're also smart enough and humble enough to appreciate market dynamics, fluctuations, different things that could arise, and how you need to respond to them. So it's side-skirting your question a little bit, but I think you have to have that in-depth knowledge, but then also realization that a lot of different things could change, and acknowledge that during the presentation.
Nice. I would add to that customer discovery, right? Talking with others so that it's not just your perspective and translating those those results into the conversation so that you have that thought leadership, but it's not just your perspective. Another quick tactic when I think about a Q&A, maybe you're concise during the delivery, but then someone asks a question and you decide to go down this rabbit hole, you've missed an opportunity for a lot more questions to be asked. And so it's not a bad thing to say, wow, what a great question. Here's some quick thought, but I'd love to catch up with you afterwards or maybe over coffee tomorrow and lean into that with a little bit more depth. So just a couple of thoughts to add to that.
I would piggyback on what you just said. A lot of the times, even during the pitch itself, which is usually 8 to 10 minutes when I'm talking with a big venture capital group, I will spend minimal time on the actual product itself. It's very high level. It's like, here's what we do, here's how we accomplish it, here's where we've been, here's where we are now, here's where we're going and why it makes sense. But like you said earlier, a lot of the feature sets, a lot of the reasons for the technology behind it, we don't go into depth about, because we want those questions, we've preempted them later on down the road, and that way you can use those questions that come to you to really, demonstrate your expertise and your knowledge. It's like you were expecting them from the get-go, you have your answers lined up and ready.
Yeah.
So a VC does a lot of research on you before you pitch to them. How much research do you do on the companies that you pitch for, or before you pitch? Is there any platform you use or database that you like to get information from?
I used to do a lot more research, and so I'd say we've raised 3 rounds now. So we did a pre-seed, we did a seed, we just finished Series A, now we're going to Series B. For pre-seed and seed and half of the Series A, none of the Series A, we were really targeting any investor, at those early stages. It was like minimal traction, minimal revenue, still an idea out there. So like anybody who would give us money was a great investor in our mind. So we would do all the research we could. We used PitchBook, we used Crunchbase. Do you guys have any university connections? Those are always free resources that they usually have. I would usually see the baseline criteria. Okay, does this fit my industry? Do they write check sizes that are within the range I'm targeting? And what does their portfolio look like? What do all their portfolio companies look like? Are there any things that match close to us? And then I would usually research 2 of their portfolio companies that could be potential clients. Because the big thing for these VCs is like, they want to deploy capital, but they want to deploy capital in a manner that they feel like they're working for your company to better their investment, right? So the more useful they think they are to you, the better likelihood of them investing in your company. So if I would finish up a meeting with a VC, I'd say, hey, I noticed that you guys invested in company A and company B. I think that we could help them in X, Y, Z different areas. Do you mind giving me an introduction? And instantly right away, they love providing that kind of stuff. They like feeling useful, and it's a great way to help really build rapport with these investors.
Did you give, you said you kind of started with anybody in the seed stage. Were you thinking investors focus on digital health, or that wasn't necessarily at that point strategic for you?
It was strategic for us. A little backstory in the company. So we actually launched in January of 2020. We had a tech-enabled staffing platform for critical access hospitals, so large rural hospitals and large rural clinics called federally qualified health centers. COVID initially ran us up super high, and we were like 1,000% in the course of 3 months, but then dropped us right back down. And then so we ended up doing a huge pivot, spent 3 months twirling our thumbs into the digital health space. So that being said, we were, at the time we were raising our seed, we had just moved into digital health. We weren't really sure about the stability of that market, given the tailwinds of COVID. And so we anticipated potentially needing to pivot again. And we wanted investors that would be flexible enough with us. And so somebody with a really strong thesis in a certain area might not welcome a pivot such as that. Now at this stage though, for Series A and Series B, we have an ideal list of investors. There's a top 10 list for us that we won't raise from unless we get it from one of those partners.
Keep those questions coming. I have a quick one on landing commitment. One of my favorite talks during the Techstars experience is from David Cohen. And it's just an eye-opening thing to hear the ways that he guides founders to not letting someone just kind of float off into Neverland. So when you think about earning a commitment, whether it's a no, maybe, or yes, somewhere in between, what are some tactics that you found to be interesting?
Landing commitment, that's a great one. Landing commitment is really important at pre-seed, seed, and maybe Series A stages, because a lot of times you're dealing with individuals, you might be dealing with angels or certain syndicates that are coming together. And a lot of them are fearful. They want to see somebody else have committed to your round already. And so it's really about driving this like FOMO, you know, they don't want to miss out. And so I like to do time-based and duration-based decision-making for them. And I usually like to, you know, bluff a little bit. So there's a little bit of art with this, a little bit of finesse, and thank goodness Eric left because he's one of my investors. So we can actually be transparent here. You know, sometimes, let me preface by saying, growth hides a lot of problems within a company. And so we've been fortunate enough to experience some decent growth. And so I've always had confidence that I get the rounds closed. So if I go into one with an early, you know, in a seed round, sometimes I might go into it and say, hey, you know, this round, we already have a lot of commitments stacked up. We're talking with a few other VCs. There's, you know, X amount of dollars allocated left in this round, and we're anticipating closing in the next 3 weeks. You know, this fits your thesis, it fits your mold. Is this something you're interested in? So you want to prompt the verbal sort of feedback right away, like, yeah, we are definitely interested in your company. Once you get that, it says, and then it's like, okay, you know, if I have this much left, what can I count you in for? They'll kind of wobble back and forth occasionally, and it's, you know, say there's $400,000 left in there, and their average check size is $100,000. Might be, can I count you in for $200,000? Like, yeah, it's a little big for us. I'm like, can I count you in for $100,000? And it's usually like, yeah, please write us down for $100,000. But just getting that commitment is like the first 10% of the process. Then it's staying on top of them over and over again, every single day thereafter, making sure they're still firm on that commitment and getting the round wrapped up shortly after. But it's a combination of like, you really want to drive that potential fear. You want to make them feel comfortable that other people are already in the round. You want to make them feel comfortable that, okay, there's only a small allocation left, so I better hop on this quickly, and then give them a definitive time limit. You know, 3 weeks we're closing.
All right, I have an interactive, go ahead, we'll start here.
Okay, thank you for that. My question is, when you started, how long it take for you to get the first pre-seed? And after that, how would the term sheet is look like for you? When the investor say yes, you guys accept the offer, or how everything look like?
We took a more non-traditional path with the first couple rounds. So our pre-seed one, we had a decent network built up already. So I went to a lot of my former colleagues that were in the medical field and, you know, told them what I was doing, not from an investment perspective, but just saying, hey, I need your validation on this. Like, this is what I'm planning on building. Would this make sense to you, given, you know, you're deep in the medical field yourself? And you know, a lot of them came back and said, yeah, this is brilliant. I think, you know, here's some money. So we were really fortunate enough to the people that we were already doing customer discovery with wanted to invest in it, and they were, you know, high net worth individuals that wanted to deploy some extra capital. So our pre-seed was pretty quick. I mean, it took a month, which is very atypical. They usually say bank on about 6 months for every single round that you do. Make sure the capital in the bank can be floating the business over that time course. The seed round, or no, that was pre-seed, and we had a board established already. And so we actually ended up coming together with the board and saying, let's draft a term sheet together, and then took that back to the investors and they invested underneath that term sheet. So your board, you know, typically is supposed to represent the interests of your investors. And so between management team and board, we came together and agreed on a term sheet. Seed round, we did very similar sort of thing, and that was the first time we took institutional money. So venture capital money came in at seed round. And then Series A is the first time we had term sheets come in, and then we negotiated on the specific terms. So there was things in there regarding like governance and how many board seats they wanted, how many observer seats they wanted, clauses in there about dividends, whether or not they were getting paid. And so those are different aspects that you can negotiate on. And we did. We pushed back on a lot of different things. We pushed for different voting rights. And depending on the investors that you're getting, And how aggressive you are, you can push back, and how many term sheets you have. So it's kind of just a game.
2 exercises. Who here has a co-founder? All right, so for those who don't, I'm curious how you interacted with Christian in the early days, how the early team formed even before some of the raising capital process.
So I have a co-founder. He is my COO. We still look back on the months leading up to us meeting, because in the span of 45 minutes we met, did a handshake deal, and now we took the biggest risk of our lives on a 45-minute encounter. But he had started his own startup. They were doing outdoor weight racks for public parks. Scan with the QR code, you unlock the kettlebell, you can work out in the park and lock it back up. He had a few gyms that he had deployed already across like University of Florida. He was working with San Diego to do some out there. And then he knew I was looking for a co-founder. And we had a mutual mentor that came from 1 Million Cups at a meeting, Alec Witters of HLT out of Iowa City. And Alec knew both of us. He said, hey, you guys got to meet each other. So he set up the intro via email. I reached out to Christian. Christian said, hey, nice to meet you. Love to connect. Never heard back from him. Hit him up again like 4 more times. Fine. It's like, okay, I'll meet. So we met in a Starbucks. He told me what he was doing. I told him what I was doing. Long story short, I think I was the more persuasive one, and he came and joined me instead. 45 minutes total. We negotiated equity asynchronously over email, and then off to the races. Christian and I were very, very fortunate. There's a lot of things that we probably should have explored before making such a big decision like that ahead of time, such as personality traits, what his strengths are, what his weaknesses are. It turns out that along the road we figured it out, but his strengths are very heavily embedded on internal focused processes. So he's great at team building, he's great at managing, he's great at fixing processes that are inefficient within the company itself. But he doesn't like doing the external facing things. So he doesn't like sales as much, he doesn't like interacting with clients as much, he doesn't like investor relations, which is really what I like doing. So in that way, I handle everything externally, he handles everything internal, and it's a great synergistic partnership. But very fortunate, I've seen a lot of co-founder breakups and drama.
When did he come in with you? Where was that in the journey?
I had written my first business plan for it. I put together like pro forma financial models. I had started down the pathway of using an outsourced group for an MVP. And I had commitments for a $500,000 round.
Did you have a traditional lead investor for either the pre-seed or seed round, or were you just gathering money through, say, safes or convertible notes, or did you price out? It sounds like maybe you priced out the seed round and independently raised money on the pre-seed, but could you speak a little bit more of the dynamics of that?
Yeah.
Before you do it, that was my next exercise. All right, between 0 and 5, how important do you feel like securing a lead investor is?
In which round? Just period?
First one, yeah.
Wrong. So our first round, we've done price rounds for every round so far. The early stage, we did a $500,000 round as our pre-seed. We had no lead. So we did what we described as self-led. So we set a term sheet for the stage that we were at and assigned a valuation to it. So I think we did a 2.6 pre-money, and then which gave us a 3.1 post, which is standard for somebody who has no product, no revenue, no customers, nothing. And our investors piled onto that. We had 3 of them, so there's 2 at 200 and 1 at 100. Seed round, we had no lead either. We, again, self-led, set a valuation given the revenue that we were at, assigned like a 10x multiple on it, which is standard for our industry. That was set by our board of directors and then with us concurrently. And then we had all of our prior investors wanted to reinvest, and then we had participating VCs. So that's really good. So if you have a network of angels already that are personal connections, like if you do a friends and family round and you're successful with that first round that you gather, the next round becomes easier because chances are if you have the traction and growth, all of your former investors will want to reinvest again in the next round of the pro rata. So that already gives you some baseline commitments. You don't have to disclose who those are to the investors that you're talking with, but if you can use it as a jumping off point, saying, yeah, you know, we already raised a $500,000 round, we're back in the market, we're raising $3 million, and we already have $500,000 committed. Chances are that's a lot of your old investors coming back in.
On that 10x multiple, is that a pre-money valuation or post-money that you're raising against?
That was a post.
Going back to the self-ratings of the importance of a lead investor, I think they can generate momentum, but in contrast, they can create like a paralyzation if you feel like that's all I need in order to get this thing going. And so I think there's advice here from John, recognizing that you can build around that without one, but if you land one, I think that's going to probably speed up the process. Darren will come to you next.
Oh, okay, yeah. The question I have is, I hear that some of this like founder to register the company in Delaware. I don't know if you hear about that before they will give you the money. I don't know if you guys register your company in Delaware or before get a VC form, or how you do that.
Some VCs will want you to what?
Were you incorporated in Delaware, Iowa, and how
Oh,
you did that?
yeah, so we were an Iowa corporation for the first 2 rounds, and then the last round we reincorporated in Delaware. It's not difficult to do. It took 24 hours to redo it with legal.
Going back to JD, a good attorney goes a long ways, right?
The next presenter, Joe, can definitely tell you more about that too.
I had a question about when you get your first customers going, how are you messaging and leveraging that to get the next round? Like you kind of like a step into scaling growth, the first couple steps. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah. I'd say the big thing is like when you're talking to investors, you really have to lean into your strengths. And I mean the strengths of your company at any given time point. So if your company is one that can generate revenue without really having a product there, that's something you want to talk to. You know, if you said, I started my company 3 months ago and we're already doing $25,000 monthly recurring revenue, that's a very compelling story. If your company is building something very complex for a problem out there that's going to have severe long-term impact and your TAM is massive, then you become very much a story-driven, conversational type pitch. And so that might actually change depending on where you're at throughout your company life cycle. So for us, we fell into the category A right away. We started selling, human capital. We were a staffing agency at first. We got to substantial revenue numbers on a monthly recurring basis very quickly, but we really had no product or tech behind it to back it up. So we really leaned in heavily to our metrics, our growth metrics. Now that that's been established and that's working for us, when we started building the tech and how it plays out into the longer market and how it actually grows our TAM from just away from a staffing agency, but now to more of an entire digital health infrastructure layer, that now becomes more of a story that I'm telling. It's like, yeah, we already did this, we can already generate the revenue on it, but here's the really long-term implications and here's why you want in on this round. So tying that back to the customer's question, customers, if it's growth metrics, absolutely. Like you want to baby these early customers. You want to make them incredibly happy. If they have any complaint, it doesn't matter. Customer's wrong, they're always right. You nourish them because every single investor will want client references. If you only have 2 of them at the time, you only have 2 options. So baby those connections, nourish them, do everything you can to make them happy because if you have any sort of institutional investor, they're going to be calling them and they're going to pick apart your business with your client. And they're going to ask if they're going to stay. They're going to ask how long they're going to stay for. They're going to ask where your pitfalls are, what your strengths are. It's in depth.
I think of that customer interaction, and if you're a tech founder, being able to build technology can sometimes become kind of a closed-minded moment where you just want to keep building into it versus letting it breathe through the feedback of paying customers. So allowing your paying customers to guide roadmap I think pairs into that thought of interacting during those customer discovery moments. Darren, what was on your mind?
Sorry, I just wanted to circle back to the way that you set valuation on the price round. So you said something along the lines of a 10x multiple based on the industry standard. And I think that's important because that determines about basically how much equity you're going to give up on the round.
Yeah.
You want, I'd love a 10x multiple. Like, who wouldn't in the founder's shoes? Was that based on comparable exits of other people in the industry of what they were acquired for? Or how did you go about setting the industry standard of that multiple?
Yeah, it's a combination. It's usually exit multiples. VC market is very strange right now. I mean, I've seen companies and talked to investors that are getting term sheets at 500 to 1,000x multiples right now, particularly in crypto. Others are getting 3x. So it depends on, like, service industries are like 4 to 5. Tech services are usually like 9 to 11, somewhere in there. But it's all dependent on stage. Like the problem that we encountered is that we literally started generating revenue right away within the first few months of the business with no product. And that then translated into us getting judged on a revenue multiple rather than the story of what we were building. So the first round, the 2.6, there was absolutely nothing on the business plan there. And so $3 to $5 million valuation at that time point is good. Take whatever you can within that stage. Our seed stage, I think we were doing probably $75,000 monthly revenue. And so then we got judged on that, and then we ended up just doing a 10x rough on that. And then for Series A, we got judged again, 10x. Actually, I think we ended up doing a 12 or 13x on that one because we also started believing in story of what we were building at that time point. But some of the big players out there, like if you look at like Andreessen, like A16Z, Tiger, Sequoia, they have a different model where they just dump a shitload of cash into a company at a super high valuation and expect you to grow into it over time. And so it's not uncommon to see 30, 40, 50 X's on some of those companies. But that means that if you just kind of plateau or you have slower growth over the next few years and you burn through that cash, you're going to go through a down round, which means you might be getting a new investor at a lower valuation than the prior round, which just sets it up for a horrible narrative, horrible story, and makes raising the next round all the more difficult. So I'm a huge proponent of being conservative with your round valuations. It's super enticing to try to take the biggest one you get, the biggest term sheet you get, but make your next ones easier because nothing's guaranteed.
Thank you.
Yeah, lean into what you're going to use the money for, and translate that into how much you actually need. And to your point, John, like if you come out with this crazy valuation, that next round could suffer because of those early decisions. Sure.
Okay. Yeah, for your pre-seed, what was the main challenge that you faced during the pre-seed? For the first time you raised money, what was the challenge?
If I'm going to be honest with you, that was the least challenging one I've ever had. I was fortunate enough to have a lot of high net worth individuals that I knew and had used as customer discovery, and they had extra cash laying around at that time point that they wanted to deploy into something. So, I mean, that was just 3 individuals that I had to convince. They looked over the business plan and said, "Hey, I want to write a check." If
Because you use your network, right?
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah.
What do you do when you don't have that kind of network?
It's a great question. I'm coaching a couple of people that are in this situation right now. Angel groups are probably the biggest way to do it. Every node that you can get is great for your network. So Plains Angels, Midwest Angels, NPD Angels, like anybody around here, get in front of their groups because you're pitching to 20, 30 people, individuals in there, and then put an ask at the end of it. It's like, hey, if this doesn't interest you, but you know somebody in your network that it does interest, like pair me up. So I've had a lot of those kind of conversations where it's like, yeah, I don't have the capital to deploy to do it, but I have a lot of friends who are in the healthcare space who would love something like this. So each other, every person that you get in front of at this time point, try to ask them for like 7, 10 other connections of people that they know.
And being like at peace with the fact that this is kind of perpetual activity. It's not all going to come together in the ways you might think it will. And so having that willingness to be persistent and going through those layers of engaged network And knowing that you're going to get told a lot of no's will thicken the skin so that you can find that first yes and pile it on to there.
And you gotta start early. Start early. Like, as soon as you're done with one, almost just jump into the next one because you're gonna burn through it faster than you ever thought. And the round's always gonna take longer than you thought. On both our seed and our Series A, we had tapped all of our cash. We had early commitments, and so I started cashing those checks early. And we had floated the company like 6 weeks until the round was closed on both rounds. And that's not a position I ever want to be in again. I told myself that after seed when I got to Series A too.
We have David Mandel, one of my other favorite talks within the Techstars ethos, and he explains how to be a badass CEO. And along with like a performance flavored culture, really it becomes the role of a CEO to make sure that the engine doesn't run out of fuel. And that can be hard when you build a company and have such a heart connected to your product or to customers. But allowing your team to evolve without cloning yourself, giving the ability for others to lean into the success of the overall mission, gives you that bandwidth that you can stay focused so that the runway doesn't get too short. I want to leave time to look at that slide deck too, but Derek, let's.
When in the process did you have your Techstars? Was it during the pivot or was it before?
That was one of my questions. There's a thread amongst us that connects us. Is the accelerator experience, the GIA is in the house, Techstars, like how did that kind of experience fit into the life cycle of your experience?
So we had launched January 2020 with our original model, ran that until April, and then realized that our market had just gone to shit. And then we sat around for the entire summer twiddling our thumbs trying to figure out what we were going to do. We entered Techstars in September of that year, I think, under our original model, and then within the first 2 weeks made the pivot.
Accelerators will push you fast in both directions.
Yeah. And so we had raised the $500,000 round. We took a portion of the Techstars money, and then coming out of Techstars, we raised seed.
Something I appreciate within that experience is thinking of your financial model, less about you and your financial model against the investors. It's more of an instrument that you use with the investor to explore the current state and throw out some scenarios that they might find interesting or that you'd like to introduce into that discussion. And so knowing how different things are going to impact it, knowing how to navigate it in a real-time situation gives you the ability to use that tool with those investor conversations instead of trying to prove that you're right when in reality you might not be. And so I think that's a little tidbit there when I think about the focus on financial modeling within some of the accelerator experiences.
I will tell you that investors actually do not give a shit about your financial model. They want to see that you're confident enough that you're going to hit some big revenue milestones and that's worth their money putting into it because they're going to expect a massive return on it. But the bigger thing out of it is that they want to see that you understand your market and your industry so well that you understand the drivers of it. So all the money flowing into your industry and then where it flows out. So if you can demonstrate that in the financial model being like, so for us in healthcare, it's like we can get paid by patients, we can get paid by our telehealth clients, or we can get reimbursed by insurance. And so for accepting all three of those different things, where's the money going out, where's the spend going out, clinician wages, credentialing, the tech structure that we use, our legal and finance fees. And so they want to know if you can tweak one of them, like if you can decrease the cost of that you're paying out to clinicians, then your margin is going to increase. Or if you can increase the reimbursement you're getting back from these insurance payers, then your margin is going to increase. So it's not about the actual dollar signs that's attached to it, whatever. That doesn't matter, but it's more of the inputs and the outputs that they're looking for to show that you truly know what you're talking about.
Steve.
So I'm just wondering, did you end up getting other co-founders in the business, or it's just you two?
So jumping back even farther, my first co-founder was a classmate of mine from medical school. We were at Tailgaters in Iowa City one night. We had just spent the night or the day in the ICU. It was all you can eat wings. So we're like 5 beers deep, like 20 wings deep, we had this idea. We launched it. But he was part of the military, and he was at medical school on a military scholarship. So once he graduated, he was obligated to go serve for 7 years in residency there. And then I jumped into it full time. And so at that time, but we already knew he was gonna have to leave, and so there was a 3-month overlap with Christian in there.
And my second question to that was, culturally within your business, how do you deploy your culture within the company to make sure that your mission is being achieved?
It's a great question. So we established our mission and our vision right away. So, first day that Christian was there, we went through and we defined it. It was like, mission is improve community health outcomes through accelerated delivery of medical services. This is why we're still back at our original model. And so it still holds true today. And then we wanted a very simple, easy vision for everybody to align on. And we decided on healing anywhere, which we believe is translated very smoothly over into telehealth space. The actual day-to-day culture starts top down. And it gets refined over time. It's not something you can just set in stone, say, hey, it's gonna be this. It's just led by example. So Christian and I, slightly different, but together we formed this ethos, if you will. And then each person that we hired after that, we thought should fit into that ethos. And so if you continue propagating what you feel is represented by you within your employees as you hire, that's just going to get maintained down the line. I think some of our hiring practices today lend credence to that. So HR always takes first interview down with new employees, and then they usually go to the department head for round 2, depending on which department they're joining. And then if it's ops related or if it's growth related, then it either comes to me on the growth side or goes to Christian as round 3. And by the time they get to us round 3, they're already greenlit. They already meet the criteria for the role. They're a good fit otherwise for the actual position itself. But then it's more just a culture check in the last stop. So just spend 15 minutes, easy conversation, like, hey, what do you like to do? What's fun in your life? Like, what actually motivates you and drives you? What's your favorite swear word? You like to throw that. But that's like day-to-day culture. As far as the mission and vision, whoever is the CEO is going to be in charge of running that. We have bi-weekly stand-ups with the entire team. So we have a hybrid team, half are local here in Des Moines, half are spread across the US, and then everybody gets on Zoom twice a week, and we give company updates, some operational updates, sales updates, whatever. But then I usually just round it out with a 2-3 minute synopsis on like, okay, here's a big picture of where we're going, what we're doing, and why we're doing it. And so I haven't talked to the team in a couple of weeks because I've just been traveling the past 2. But today I got on, I gave a 5-minute one. I said, here's what we talked about with investors over the past couple of weeks. Here's what we're hearing from clients. Here's why the industry is fragmented. And here's why the solution of what we're building makes sense. And it's all due to all of you guys here and what you're building. And then I tied it back into it and said, yeah, even though we are concerned about serving more patients, serving more clients, growing and meeting their demands, at the end of the day, we're still a healthcare company, and our patients are our end users. And so we can't forget about the mission and vision of why we're founded, and then go back into that.
I have a question about how you handle, or have you had any challenges related to time management? Because you mentioned that, so you're a founder, you're also seeking, investment, plus you're also trying to grow the company at the same time. And then we've also learned today how the moment you have, as you bring in more and more investors, you have meetings and things like that, plus just your personal life. How do you balance all that? Like, have you had any challenges, or like, what are some things that you do to kind of create sense in the chaos?
Yeah, we've all had group projects in school where all your other group members sucked, and you took on the entire thing by yourself. I was the one that always took it on by myself. And so the interesting thing about Start is now you have the chance to choose your own team members, right? So choose good ones. And choose ones that you can actually relinquish and delegate authority to on certain aspects. So one thing I've always tried to live by when we started this is that I'm gonna hire people that are much smarter than I am. I think we've lived up to that. So there's people that I'm just like, this is your area. I have no idea what it means or what it does, but you make it work. I'm gonna rely on you to make it work. So delegation of authorities was the hardest challenge at first, but that frees up so much of your time later on down the road. There's so many things I don't know that are happening in business right now, other than a quick overview that I get from each person that reports to me. But I have full faith and confidence that they have it figured out. And then it just depends on where you are at the life cycle. I'd say no matter what, there should be founder-led sales until you're at least 100 million in ARR. The majority of my time is spent on growth. So I only manage the sales and the marketing teams right now. And then I'm also out there headhunting myself. So I'm connecting with people on LinkedIn with the big enterprise clients I would like to get. Because sometimes you just need the title and get in front of some of those bigger players. So 50 to 60% of my time is spent on growth. I'd say right now 25% of my time is spent on internal team management, internal meetings that need to get done. Maybe 10% a week is investor relations, current investor relations, and another 15 to 20% are new investor relations. But that shifts. My focus shifts once it gets time to raise capital again. And then it's usually about 60 to 70% of my time is fundraising. And then, the remaining 30 to 40% is internal stuff and maybe some growth deals that I'm still working on. But my calendar used to be packed with every meeting possible that I could have because I thought I needed to have my hands in everything. Now I'll reserve chunks of time during my day to get work done that I need to get done, or just do market research that I need to do to figure out where we're going to go next.
One of the benefits of a culture-based or a performance-based culture is that you can lean into others as the team expands, and the confidence of allowing others to lead gives you some of the bandwidth back to continue evolving the company. And then I would also finish with the fact that this is a lifestyle. Of course, there's value in balance and borders and boundaries and all the things, but for a lot of people, this is just their life. And being okay with that gives you, I think, a sense of peace, knowing that you might be working when others aren't. But what is the funny phrase? Like, you work 80 hours so that you don't have to work 40.
Well, do we still have time to see his pitch?
Yeah, we got 3 more questions, but should we move
We got
to the
about
next
2
stage?
minutes, so if we can go through the pitch, that would be great.
How much?
15.
Oh, perfect.
Okay.
All right, pal, I've got that brought up for you. And instead of doing the pitch, we thought there may be more in-depth value to allow John to kind of flip through this collection of slides and have kind of a narrative around the purpose of each one. So take us through a little showcase here.
Yeah, so I think Diana wanted me to start with just kind of the normal intro that I go through to see how I kind of set the stage for the rest of the presentation and then my ending, but we can talk through some of the reasons why I dropped in other slides here. But kind of already gave it to you earlier. Hi, I'm John. I'm from a small rural farm town in Iowa, best known for Dutch people, windmills, and tulips. Went off to a small school in Michigan for undergrad, started my first company up there in the drone space, eventually exited that to a partner once I graduated, then came back to Iowa for medical school and joined up with an ag tech startup when I was first here. Doing a lot of research for them, ran research, helped secure a lot of state and federal grant funding, doing data analytics for health performance for livestock. Eventually left that to focus on my studies, ended up graduating medical school, matched into residency for plastic surgery, but had started Open Loop as a passion project. And I'd ultimately seen enough growth and traction with the company where I thought I could have a larger impact on the healthcare ecosystem by doing this full time rather than going out to practice clinical medicine. So never where I thought I'd end up, but it's been a wild ride nonetheless. And so I think it's important to start with the origin for Open Loop. What was the nidus for this idea? And I think it was really based on a shared mutual experience between myself, my co-founder who was a colleague of mine at medical school, and both of our fathers who are physicians in rural Iowa. And between all 4 of us, we witnessed this growing disparity between an ever-growing patient population that requires clinical services, yet a very stagnant clinical workforce over the past 40 years. And we knew that we weren't going to increase the overall size of the workforce in any meaningful way, but we knew that our colleagues, physicians might have an afternoon off, an opening every Monday, or every Friday morning off, or patient cancellations throughout the day. So for us, it became a question of how do you take a pre-existing workforce and now make them more efficient at delivering care? And then I usually start and talk about, okay, that led to us building this tech-enabled staffing platform that we launched a year ago. Then we ended up pivoting, and now we're in this digital health space. But I say that as we moved into the digital health space, now here's the current problems that our clients are facing. It's a super fragmented industry. If a digital health company wants to get spun up and actually launch, these are all the different puzzle pieces that they're trying to maneuver and put together in their heads. And oftentimes it doesn't fit well at all. They're trying to jam square pegs into round holes. And then straight after that, I jump into what open loop does from a very high level.
We go back just once real quick?
Yeah.
Sorry, Matt. Thanks.
So then I take all these puzzle pieces that they said, and they're now organized and streamlined into one single entity, one infrastructure layer. So we connect the clinicians through us directly to these telehealth companies, an entirely one-stop shop. And so I'm usually spending about a minute on each of these slides. This one just gives an instant solution to the problem that I just described within the industry. So right off the bat, the stage has been set. I hooked up with my experience on founder market fit. I explained the problem, why it's kind of personal to me, you know, what we saw and why it's here. Because of our pivot, end up at a problem that we're now addressing, and then here's a very quick solution to it. But then I love to set the stage right away early on of like, okay, here's where we were. We were tech-enabled staffing in 2020. Then we moved into this SaaS platform, this infrastructure layer that we're building right now that I described. But here's the grand vision, stage 3, stage 4, and here's how it applies to the broader narrative at hand. The biggest mistake that I've seen other founders make in their pitches is they will talk about the problem and then they will jump straight to this massive idea on how it can be solved. And there's a huge disconnect. There's multiple iterations along the way, there's multiple steps along the way, or even phases along the way that need to occur before you get there, and you've lost investors already because they're like, that's too wild, that's too out there. But if you can show a iterative process to achieve that end goal, that resonates a lot better with them. So I'll just say, phase 1 is what I already talked about, phase 2 is what we're currently at, but phase 3 and phase 4 is really where I want to spend a lot of my time. I want to say that I'm not good at this, but you should usually have 2 decks. One that you pitch from that doesn't have all this wording on here, and then one that you send in if they request a copy that has your talk track built in. I've kind of done a hybrid because I'm lazy, where it could have more words if I was sending it, and it should have less words since I'm talking from it. But phase 1, then, so if you look at it, it's color coded along here, so phase 1 is green, then red, then gray, then blue. It plays out to the same thing here that we've done, so it just draws the reader's attention. And then instead of doing a dedicated slide to each TAM, I'll put each phase's TAM at the bottom corner. So I said tech-enabled staffing, that makes a lot of sense. You know, we were already there. And then when we tried to apply that same tech-enabled staffing model to the digital health space, we learned a lot, and that's how we ended up here. You know, so I'll walk through. I say, we started off tech-enabled staffing. We tried to apply it to digital health by matching supply to the demand during this massive scale that happened during COVID. But we very quickly learned that these telehealth clients that we were serving weren't as operationally established as their hospital counterparts. They didn't have all those pieces that I talked about in my promise statement. They didn't have the electronic health record. They didn't have the ability to issue out prescriptions. They didn't have the legal setup. They didn't have X, Y, and Z. And so it turns out that we had to become this full infrastructure layer to power these digital health companies because that's what they were needing. So now I'm drawing the investors from, okay, it makes sense. You entered with staffing, that's your foot in the door. You discovered a new problem. They still need the staff, but they also need all these other components. So now I'm starting to understand how you arrived at where you are today. And then this is kind of where I drop in like our catchy phrase. We're building a Shopify for digital health. And sometimes I'll change that depending on who the investor is. So like the last one I just pitched to, they were seed investors in Shopify. So they like that. Was there a question? Yeah.
What are the pictures on? Are you purchasing those pictures or just, I mean, because is there some sort of copyright or something you present that?
These, I think, I have no idea because I didn't do the design. Our graphic designer did, but I think they're Adobe stock.
Okay.
Like if you already have Photoshop, you can throw Adobe stock into the mix. Another really good one, when you think about like royalty-free media, is Artlist.io. This will give you music that doesn't flag your YouTube videos. as some background. You can lean into the tone, the speed, the duration. So those are some quick tools. And then I'll give you another hot resource. Smart Mockups is a site that allows you to showcase your platform, even if it might not be completely real yet. And so those are a couple of multimedia flavored resources that can enhance your storytelling. Continue.
So I also like this TAM down in the corner because it shows that with each phase that we go through, it builds off the last one. And so I always emphasize and say, what we're creating by going through these phases is building this complete ecosystem of infrastructure. None of it's divergent. It's all things that are necessary. We just started with the MVP within that layer, if that makes sense. And so they like to see this TAM growing with each new phase that we go through.
Can you spell that out for people? What does TAM mean?
Oh, total addressable market. So it's like the problem that you're solving, what does that represent in terms of dollar amount? So if you're looking at like the advertising space, like if you're building a new ad tech platform to compete with Google, you're looking at like trillions of dollars.
Quick question just around like phase one, because the staffing industry is one that like is super fascinating to me, because I think that industry is just like one that might lend itself more to like private equity than like maybe traditional venture capital, since it typically tends to have lower margins. I think with the tech-enabled piece, that's always one that's like that will increase your margins, whatever the case might be. So within that, when you were pitching this to like your first round of investors, like was this more of like you were kind of mapping out the vision, or was there ever like an opportunity kind of up front, like early on, where you were just like, I can raise kind of like maybe 1 or 2 rounds, start generating profit like earlier on if we stick with the staffing model and not necessarily kind of go down the like institutional VC route, like over Series A, B, C, and D?
Yeah. Good question. So our first business model, the one that I raised the first round on, was like the Uber for staffing. Right? So as a hospital in a rural area said, I need 3 ICU nurses at this time point for these shifts with these certifications, and then it would ping our network and match them with 3 people that had the same availability, same qualifications. We pair them up. So it was like staffing with a twist.
Yeah.
So I knew I needed the capital to do it. It wasn't something I could bootstrap. Although I guess we kind of did the first part, but we did exactly as you said. So we built out a front-facing site. We manually enrolled hospitals. We had a clinician enrollment, but on the back end, we were just pairing up an Excel sheet. And so we generated like $200,000 just pairing up in Excel by doing that for the longest time. But then after we did that, market crashed. And so then we pivoted to digital health.
It's just super interesting because that was on that stuff.
Okay. So payer integration, I talked about phase 3, and then phase 4, how it applies to the overall thing. And so each phase I'm walking through, it's like, okay, we did X, Y, and Z. Now here's the next thing that's needed based on what our clients are telling us. Phase 4, and then I go straight to like, okay, now I've told you about our business a little more. How are we generating money? So we have a strange model. We charge a SaaS plus we charge a commission on top of our clinicians' wages. Just some quick stats there at the bottom that I give them. Spark interest, and then I hit with
Was
the
that
traction.
common for your industry?
Sorry?
Was that common, or was that like innovation on the financial model?
It's not common, but I wouldn't say it's super innovative. It's a mix. Usually it's one or the other. But inevitably they're always going to ask you the questions, so I usually just get this one out of the way. And then I hit him with the traction stuff, because like I said, we started generating revenue really early, and we've seen pretty successful growth. So between 2020 and 2021, we did about 1,000% growth. And then I like to show that because, like I said, growth hides a lot of problems, and you get a lot of people interested. That was one of our strengths, so I played into it. We also just have a bunch of clinicians enroll in the platform, so that's another stat I like up there. Like, choose your stats wisely. If anybody here is familiar with actual statistics, like the study of it, you can make data look any way you want it to look. Mm-hmm. So pick and choose wisely on what you're going to show investors. Sales strategy, we're in an industry and a time right now, unfortunate enough at Open Loop, that all of our sales are inbound right now. And so we have super quick payback time, we have super quick sales cycles, given, I mean, in industry, like 7-week sales cycle for B2B is great. 3-week payback period, average MRR, account size is great. So we're playing to all of our strengths here. By the time somebody hits our door, we already know that they're, have X percentage of closing right away. And so that's why these stats out here line up well with what investors want to see. If I were in a different industry, like D2C, I'd put different stats here. But it's all about choosing what makes sense for your company right now.
John, for a lot of this, does your data room have like the backup to support this
Yeah.
stuff?
Yeah.
I'm asking a lot of questions that I'm just hoping are helping other people.
Yeah.
And then when you guys are calculating your customer acquisition cost, like, does that just like, is that all of your like sales development representatives' wages plus all of the like inorganic, organic marketing, all of that?
Yeah.
That's all blended in there, right?
Yeah.
Got it.
At first, it was just like wages of salespeople because we didn't have any marketing. We weren't spending any money on marketing.
Yeah.
Divided by the number of accounts that we had. Now it factors in some B2B marketing that we have, organic marketing spend, that person's salary who's pumping out the content, sales wages, commissions.
A lot of people like to ask that question, right? What's your customer acquisition costs? And so having the number really quickly, but then maybe adding a layer of why, and how that comes together will prove that it's not just a number that you've come up with, but that it's supported by some key metrics. I know we're getting close to time here, so we'll start wrapping it up there.
Yeah, so then this is pretty much going to be the end. Then I put out a slide on like, okay, if we're fundraising at that time point, how are we going to allocate spend? Here's prior funding history on the left, and then here's where the new funding is coming in, and here's where it's going. And the reasons why it makes sense. So they usually have a few questions on this one, and then exit roadmap. They're always going to like, how are you planning on getting out of this? Is it via acquisition? Is it via IPO? So depending on what investors you want to talk to, like very early on, I said acquisition within 5 to 7 years by some of those different types of companies listed up there. Now, as a company, we fully believe that we can go the public route, and so I always tell investors that that's the direction we're driving the company right now. And that'll also switch the types of investors you are reaching out to and trying to talk to. Some of them are taking huge bets and trying to hit that IPO with the company. Others are fine with a 10 to 15x return via acquisition. So you can change that depending on what you actually want and who you're talking to. And then I followed up with team at the very end. I've usually already given my little spiel at the front, so I save the team slide for last. This is really outdated, so I apologize. But I won't talk about anybody at the bottom, but I'll usually talk about my co-founder a little bit, just like a quick 30-second intro on him and why we work well together. And then here's where I close it off with the big long-term vision. Like they've already heard where we're trying to drive this product, but you got to put it in something like tangible for somebody, right? And so I say, at Open Loop, when we accomplish everything that we've set out to do, we expect to be the engine powering every single patient visit, be it in person or virtually, within the next 10 years. And so that's just like an impactful statement. It's like, it's a huge vision. It probably sounds cocky as hell, but at the same time, there's like a soft spot behind it, right? Because we're serving patients at the end of the day. And I think that kind of softens the blow a little bit. And in doing so, we'll help close the gap in healthcare, relating it all the way, 360 degrees back to the problem that hit them with in the first place.
Very nice. Let's give John a hand. And I don't know what's next, but I'd say we are ready to.
Any last questions, sir?
How many slides you did?
That was 17, but then I have a bunch of stuff in the appendix that I'll use occasionally.
Backslides?
Yeah.
Can you just quickly give an overview of you mentioned at what stage you went through Techstars, but what was the top 1 or 2 things that you feel like that added an advantage to you, or the benefits that you got from going through the program? And I say top 1 or 2 because I'm sure there's just so many benefits.
It's interesting because even if you'd ask my co-founder, he derived a completely different set of things that he took away from it than I did.
Sure.
For me, so I'll preface by saying I think Techstars are extremely valuable if it's your first company and the earlier stage you are. I think for us, for me personally, the big value that I got out of Techstars was the network. A lot of the programming we had already experienced, I think. We had gone through those painful points already. We had built a financial model already. We had a lot of mentors and advisors up to that point that had given us a lot of that stuff. But the network for Techstars is invaluable. There's literally probably nobody in the world that you couldn't get to via the Techstars network if you wanted. And then having the logo makes raising capital a lot easier. I think.
Having a logo, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Techstars logo on the bottom of your site is kind
Oh,
of like
having
being
their
featured in
logo.
the.
Oh, yeah, having their logo.
I'm sorry, I thought you meant your logo.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I can see that.
One of the signals that Curdy often says, and I know we have plenty of folks in an accelerator right now, is that you have to have something to accelerate.
Yeah.
So knowing where you're at within your own company's stage is a good way of determining if and when an accelerator experience might finish. I know you got one more thing to say, but that's probably a chance to mention Techstars Iowa. The application's technically closed last night, but turns out you've got friends. And so if there's conversation that needs to be had, please find me afterwards.